President Betty. Good afternoon. Cheryl Collins has a Bachelor of Arts and Master of Arts in History from Kansas State University and has been the director of the Riley County Historical Museum since 1988. She currently serves on the Board of Directors of the Kansas State Historical Society, the Partner Advisory Board of the Freedom's Frontier National Heritage Area, and the Governor's Council on Travel and Tourism. She grew up in Wichita but had 3 sets of great-grandparents who lived in Riley County. Please welcome Cheryl Collins.
Thank you very much for inviting me to be here and allowing me to talk about my new obsession, Manhattan and Riley County during the Victorian period of the 1880s. If you have trouble hearing, start waving and I'll start getting louder. We've long been interested in this period at the museum, in part because the Wolf House Museum's standing exhibit interprets home life in the 1880s. So how many of you have visited the Wolf House Museum at 630 Fremont? Great, great, great. Well, those of you that have not, we'd love to have you come visit. It's open Saturdays and Sundays, 2 to 5, and it's free. And come on down. You can visit the 1880s. We chose to interpret the 1880s at the Wolf House primarily for 3 reasons. That's when all the additions to the house were complete. A large part of the furnishings Mrs. Wolf gave us with the house would fit into that period well, and because it gave us a different era to explore than that of the Goodnow House, Hartford House, and the Pioneer Log Cabin. But our latest focus of obsession for this period is that the Riley County Historical Museum staff will be teaching an OSHA UFM class on the topic starting tomorrow. So today's talk is a little preview. And of course, I always love to talk with the Manhattan Rotary Club. I've long admired the work that you do in the community, in the country, and around the world. So thank you very much for inviting me to come here today. So what were the 1880s like here? The 1880s were part of the Victorian era, when Queen Victoria was on the throne of Great Britain, 1837 to 1901. The 1880s were also part of what is termed the Gilded Age, the period from the 1870s to around 1900. The phrase was coined by the writer Mark Twain in his 1873 book, The Gilded Age, A Tale of Today. That book satirized an era of serious social problems and political corruption masked by a thin gold gilding. Twain used as his corruption inspiration Kansas Senator Samuel Pomeroy. Yes, that's the man for whom Pomeroy Street in Manhattan is named. He was involved in the founding of Manhattan, but that's a different story. And another source of inspiration was the 1873 resignation amid corruption charges of Kansas Congressman Alexander Caldwell. He also had local connections as he was a relative and close associate of influential Manhattan businessman E.B. Purcell. The American Gilded Age was characterized by rapid industrialization, labor and farmer upheaval, railroad building, advances in technology and public services, the rise of cities, expansion into and the last days of the American frontier, the building of great wealth and increasing disparity between those with wealth and those in poverty, as well as 2 national depressions in 1873 and 1893. The 1880s also brought the second United States presidential assassination. James Garfield was elected president in 1880. Just 4 months after his inauguration in January 1881, he was shot and killed at a Washington, D.C. train station. Vice President Chester Arthur became president and served until 1885. Grover Cleveland was elected president in 1884 and then began serving in 85. He lost his bid for re-election in 1888 and was replaced by Benjamin Harrison in 1889, which worked out pretty well for former Kansas State University, or Kansas State College President John A. Anderson, who was an old college roommate of Harrison's. John Anderson was at loose ends in 1891 after leaving Congress, and his old friend appointed him consul to Egypt. Anderson only served a short time before his health broke and he died. Some of the 1880s milestones in products that we still have with us today include Philadelphia cream cheese. And I have some of these products just bought this week in local stores on display up here on the front table. Philadelphia cream cheese began being sold under the Philadelphia name in 1880. Philadelphia was used because it conjured up quality foods, evidently in the minds of the time. Cream cheese had been around since at least 1872. In 1880, saltwater taffy was sold at Atlantic City, New Jersey. The saltwater part of the taffy name was made a trade name in 1923. The American Red Cross was founded in 1881 by Civil War nurse Clara Barton. The only Kansas county named for a woman, Barton County, is named for her. The Brooklyn Bridge in New York City was completed in 1883. And Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson was also published that year. In 1884, the Armour Company patented their Simon Pure Leaf Lard. I hate to tell you what leaf lard is, but suffice to say it has to do with fat around the kidneys. In 1883, Oscar Mayer wieners were first produced in Chicago. The Oscar Mayer Company began branding that in earnest in 1904. The Washington Monument, which began construction in 1848, was completed in 1885. And I'm very sure they were glad to get that done since it was a 37-year project. Mark Twain's Adventures of Huckleberry Finn was published in that year too. And America's first skyscraper, the Home Insurance Building, was completed in Chicago in 1885. Originally 10 stories, 2 more floors were added in 1890. Coca-Cola got its start in Atlanta, Georgia in 1886. Today it's everywhere in the world. Dr. Pepper beat Coke into production by a year, getting its start in 1885 in Waco, Texas. And there's a nice Dr. Pepper museum in Waco if you ever go there. In 1886, Louisa May Alcott published her book, Joe's Boys, a continuation of the Little Women series started in 1868. Louisa May Alcott herself died in 1888. Tetley tea was first introduced into the United States in 1888. The tea had been around about 20 years in Great Britain, but it just got over here in 88. The Johnstown, Pennsylvania flood in 1889 was one of the worst disasters in U.S. history, caused by the collapse of a dam, resulting in the loss of 2,209 people. There were Manhattanites who had relatives there, but I think all of their relatives survived. 1889 also brought Aunt Jemima's pancake flour. Log cabin syrup got its start in 1887, so the syrup was available for the ready-mix pancakes. The name Log Cabin was chosen by its originator to honor President Lincoln. 1889 was also the year McCormick Extracts, a company that then added spices later, got its start. Mentholatum got its start in 1889 in Wichita, Kansas. The company was founded by A.A. Hyde, and at least one of his daughters attended Kansas State Agricultural College. Another Kansas product, salt, began being manufactured in 1889. Reno County, Kansas became a major producer of salt products after a large deposit was discovered in 1887-88. Morton salt began being produced in 1889. So, what were things like here in Manhattan and Kansas during the period 1880 to 1889? Kansas had a population of 996,096 people in 1880, just under 1 million. There were 80 counties in 1880. Western Kansas was just being settled. By 1889, there were 106 Kansas counties, one more than the 105 of today, because by 1893, Garfield County was made part of Finney County. Riley County had a population of 10,428, and Manhattan 2,104 residents. Manhattan became a city of the second class in 1880, a step up in class. We did not become a city of the first class until 1968. So how did people live here in the 1880s? In 1880, Manhattan did not have electricity. Heat was primarily with coal, and cooking was primarily with wood or coal stoves. Families who could afford separate heating and cooking stoves had them. Lighting was with coal oil or kerosene lamps, but people tended to get up with the sun and to go to bed with sunset. A few downtown stores were lit by manufactured gas, but very few homes went to that difficulty and expense. We did not get piped natural gas here until 1928. Manhattan got electricity New Year's Eve, 1889. So after 1890, homes increasingly had electric power and lights. In 1880, Manhattan did not have a municipal water system. Homes used wells and cisterns. Our citywide water system was installed in 1887. 50 men installed the pipes leading from Bluemont Hill. There was a slight delay in turning on the taps because evidently they did not quite match up the pipe on the hill to the one below, and so then they had to adjust. Indoor running water was a great improvement to homes after 1888. We did not have a sewer system throughout the 1880s, so all homes had an outhouse, chamber pots, and commodes. We did not get a sewer system until 1899, and then it was a private system put in by Harry Wareham. In 1908, the city bought him out and put in a citywide system. In 1880, we did not have door-to-door delivery of mail. That began in 1902. Everyone went downtown to the post office to pick up their mail in the 1880s. Telegraph was available at the Union Pacific Depot. We did not have citywide telephone service. Our citywide system started in 1894. However, we did have a few private lines in the 1880s, including one from Kansas State Agricultural College to the college treasurer's office downtown. Our first organized fire department began in 1884, shortly after the Adams House Hotel, our biggest and best hotel, burned to the ground. The city also built a frame combination firehouse city hall to hold their equipment. The bond election to build a city hall failed in 1881, so they had to combine with the fire department to get it built. And you notice that still holds true today. In 1885, the department got their new uniforms. The fire department continued as a substantially volunteer effort with some part-time paid positions until the fire chief became a full-time paid employee of the city in 1928. Manhattan got its first hospital in the 1880s. Dr. E.L. Patty opened a hospital in his building on Points. Prior to that, patients were nursed in their home or occasionally were taken in by a doctor's family. Dr. Perry, whose wife ran the boarding house at what is today the Wolf House Museum, did not practice as a physician after he moved to Manhattan, but he did clearly doctor some patients in the family boarding house. Dr. Patty's hospital was short-lived. After the Adams House burned down, Dr. Patty turned his hospital into a hotel. The doctor built a home on Points, and I think it was where the Manhattan Arts Center is today, and took in patients there. Streets were generally unpaved. Points Avenue did have a surface called macadam, a gravel and oil mixture. The city did have a sprinkler that helped cut down on dust. But if you can imagine how quickly things would dry out in the heat of August, I doubt if it helped a lot. People walked or traveled by horse, or horse and buggy, and we had many livery stables for hiring conveyance. In 1886, a horse-powered bus ran twice a day to the college. I'm not sure what route it took. I assume from the downtown area to Anderson Hall. A sidewalk was built from 3rd Street to the college up the tier in 1883. Bicycles were a craze, as was the new roller skating rink opened by Harry Wareham in the early 1880s. So what did homes look like? Victorian style dictated that more was not enough. It was an era of overstuffed rooms, layers of textiles, and wallpapers in rich reds, golds, and greens. All the opulence a person could afford, at least in the public rooms of the home. This was the industrial age. Manufacturing made lots of goods available, and the railroads brought them to wherever people were on the rail lines. The public was ready to take advantage of the variety and availability of all sorts of goods. The opening of Japan by Commodore Matthew Perry in the 1850s ushered in an interest in the Orient, and Oriental style was very pronounced in the 1880s. George Hazard Perry III, whose family owned the Wolf House from 1875 to 1938, was a nephew of the Commodore. One of the ways this Oriental influence is seen in the 1880s is through Oriental rugs, often layered with manufactured strip carpets tacked to the floor. Clothing styles also reflected the "more is not enough" motto of the 1880s. Women's clothing featured full, curvy silhouettes with shoulders gradually widening as the decade progressed. Fashionable waists were low and tiny below a full, low bust supported by a corset. The emphasis was on the back of the skirt, with the bustle at its largest in the 1880s. "Babies got back" could have been their motto. Women wore hats that changed with the seasons and fashions. Men wore coats in public, but their style changed slowly over time. Shirt collars and sometimes cuffs were detachable, so you could wear the shirt all week, or a couple of weeks, maybe, and put on clean collars, saving on laundry. Men wore hats outdoors. Children wore dresses, both boys and girls, at least until about age 4, and after they were toilet trained. Boys then graduated as short pants with stockings, and then about age 12, long pants. Girls wore short dresses until about age 12, and then they graduated into long dresses. Outerwear clothing, especially dress clothing made of more delicate materials, were generally not laundered, but were cleaned by brushing. Underwear, shirts, night clothes, children's clothes, work clothes, and house clothes were laundered, generally once a week. Laundry was a big job, and families who could afford it hired a laundress. And I love this picture of the Andersons. You can see their air conditioning hanging on the wall behind them, the fans. The coming of the Kansas Pacific, later called the Union Pacific Railroad, in 1866, opened a whole world of goods for the home. Food choices expanded. Business opportunities increased as goods and commodities for sale could be shipped to markets. In the 1880s, our rail connections were improved. The Manhattan, Alma, and Burlingame Railroad was built 1880-81, and you can see it leaving Manhattan and going to the east below the river. The Blue Valley line of the Union Pacific ran north along the Blue River and was built in the 1870s, reaching Randolph by 1885, and you can see it going up north of Manhattan on this map. The narrow gauge Kansas Central Railroad, which was also known as the Leavenworth, Kansas and Western, the LKW, or the Cuss and Wade, or the Little Kansas Wiggler, was, and I think it well deserved those names, crossed Riley County in the northern part of the county, going through let me see which counties, Sherman, Bala, and a little bit in Fancy Creek Townships, so you can see it up in the northern part of that map. In 1887, the Chicago, Rock Island, and Pacific was built, catalyst to the establishment of Fairmont Addition across the river from Manhattan, and the establishment of Keys. And in this map, you can see it going through the townships of Madison and, what am I writing? Madison and other townships that way. Development of these railroads fueled high hopes, building and plans for greater development. It also led to Riley County's involvement in a lawsuit over the railroad bonds in the latter 1880s. In the early to middle 1880s, Manhattan was booming. Manhattan had two public schools, the Avenue School on the south side of Points between 9th and 10th, where Manhattan High School East Campus is today, and Central School on Leavenworth at Juliet, where Woodrow Wilson is today, although it faced on the Leavenworth side of the street. In 1882, a new, bigger Avenue School was built because of school overcrowding. The crowding got so severe that the school board would not allow students under the age of 7 to attend. A number of subscription schools were opened, private pay schools in the homes of teachers. Even with the bigger Avenue School after 1882, the schools were so crowded that the school board rented the lower floors of the Farmers Cooperative Building at 5th and Points so that they could hold some of their classes there in 1889. Beginning in 1882, our schools had a separate classroom for African American students. Manhattan only had a handful of African Americans before the 1879 migration of the formerly enslaved out of the South. Between 1879 and 1881, an estimated 50,000 African Americans came to Kansas via St. Louis and Kansas City. As these cities were overwhelmed by the migrants, they were transported by railroad to points further down the line. These African Americans fleeing the oppression of the South were known as exodusters or exodites. Eventually, around 300 African Americans came to Manhattan. Manhattan did not have a separate high school until 1913. In the 1880s, there was a high school class taught at the Central School building, but most high school students attended Kansas State Agricultural College's preparatory school instead, especially if they were going on with their education, getting a jump on college. In 1879-80, Kansas State had 276 students and 11 faculty. By 1890, there were 514 students and 21 faculty. There was great growth and building on campus, including a new house for President Fairchild in 1885. President Fairchild took over as Kansas State's president when John A. Anderson resigned in 1879 to go to Congress. The 1880s were tumultuous politically. Economic uncertainty and labor and farm unrest helped fuel this, as well as volatile issues such as women's suffrage and prohibition. All those issues made waves here. In Manhattan, we also faced a legal challenge to the titles to all the land south of Points, and during the first part of the decade, the possibility that Fort Riley would be abandoned. By the end of the decade, though, it looked much more promising at the fort as the Army committed to bringing cavalry and artillery schools and began a major building program. The decade of the 1880s opened generally with such promise and economic boom, new railroads being built, new buildings going up all over town, manufacturing starting, a stove factory, a lock factory, a pump company, a cement firm, a windmill company, among others, improved city services with water, electricity, fire protection, and our first hospital. But by the close of the decade, the economic climate began fading fast. In 1886, there was a significant winter storm that killed a large part of the livestock here. Railroad bonds came due across Kansas and in Riley County. And as we all know, it's a lot more happy to borrow money than it is to pay it back. Oklahoma was opened to settlement, which brought opportunity to lots of Manhattanites and Kansans who participated in the first Oklahoma land run in 1889. But it helped cause the population of Kansas to decline over 50,000 between 1888 and 89, and another 40,000 between 1889 and 1890. And a national recession drifted over the country in the last couple of years of the decade. Businesses and individuals who were overextended began to fail, including, by 1890, Manhattan's two oldest banks, the Blue Valley Bank and the Manhattan Bank. In the midst of all this economic turmoil, and it was not unrelated, in 1889, the Riley County Treasurer was arrested for embezzling Riley County funds. Having no money, the county simply put a notice in the paper and said they would not pay any more bills until the new tax money came in. All in all, the 1880s came to a very gloomy end, given the bright, booming beginnings. I guess Charles Dickens had it right when he wrote, "It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief, it was the epoch of incredulity." Thank you. That word gets me. It was the season of light, it was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope, it was the winter of despair. That fits the 1880s pretty well. So thank you. I'll be glad to answer questions, and I want to be sure saltwater taffy if you'd like to taste the 1880s. Questions?
Any questions? All right. Cheryl, thank you. In honor of your speaking, this club will donate a book to Amanda Arnold School, and I have a pen here for you to sign your name in the